Get ready with me for day 5 of my Pilates challenge and then a casual work from home day. I really want to be comfy today, so I'm going to go with my new Steady State set from Lululemon. I went for the matching hoodie and sweats. I love layering them over workout clothes, especially for early morning classes. The fabric, I believe it's called Superloft, is so soft on the outside and fleecy on the inside. Obsessed. Anyway, that's the vibe for today. See you next time. Shop the new Steady State Superloft now at lululemon.com.
This week I'm talking about how taking a common sense approach to control can improve your mental health and well-being. So, let's talk about mental health. This is Let's Talk About Mental Health, a weekly podcast about mental health and well-being hosted by Jeremy Godwin. Let's talk about mental health, because the more we talk about it, the easier it gets. Hello and welcome to episode 48 of Let's Talk About Mental Health, the weekly podcast full of simple ideas for better mental health and well-being. I'm Jeremy Godwin. Thank you for joining me. This is the second in a series of 4 episodes about the foundations of good mental health, and this week is all about control. So, let's get talking. Very quickly, a big thank you to all of you who reached out to me to say happy anniversary for the 1-year anniversary of Let's Talk About Mental Health, which was just celebrated on the 7th of October. Much appreciated, and I'm looking forward to the next year. So let's get into this week's topic all about control. In Janet Jackson's song from 1986, Control, she sang, "When it has to do with my life, I want to be the one in control." Now, completely ignoring the fact that half of the songs I reference in this podcast are older than more than 70% of you listening, according to my listener statistics, I'd say that Janet was talking about something that's pretty common to all of us, the desire to be in control of our own lives. This year has been a particularly challenging one for feeling in control, and it does feel a little bit as though every time we adapt to a new set of challenges, then the posts are moved and we have to adapt all over again. It can be exhausting, and I'll admit that I've been feeling really tired this week with everything going on in the world and at home. But that's the thing about control. Most of what goes on in life is out of our control. And so the challenge for each of us is to take the time to process what's going on around us so that we can respond thoughtfully and keep ourselves moving forward by focusing on what is within our control: our words, our actions, and our feelings. And so that's what we're exploring today, the role of control and our responses to what is out of our control in good mental health and well-being. So let's start with some definitions. What is control? Control can have many different meanings depending on whether you're looking at internal versus external factors. Internal control refers to feeling that you're able to direct the course of your own destiny, as well as your ability to regulate your own emotions and behaviours. Whereas external control refers to your interactions with others and the broader world around you, such as having the power to direct or influence events or even people's behaviour, which I have a lot to say about throughout this episode, but more on that later. I've mentioned quite a few times before that in my past I worked in the corporate sector in management, and a lot of the definitions of control revolve around the business world, such as supervising and directing staff to perform certain actions. And I will be very upfront and say that I know firsthand just how difficult it can be to walk that very fine line between being in control and being a control freak. I found it difficult as a manager not to fall into the trap of micromanagement because I do like things the way that I like them. I like to make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed and everything looks polished and professional. My poor partner has to put up with a lot. The challenge for each of us, especially if you're prone to a little bit of that control freak behaviour every now and then, is to be conscious of finding the right balance between being in control versus being controlling. So why do we crave control? Because feeling like we're at the mercy of events or other people can trigger fears like insecurity, anxiety, helplessness, and vulnerability. For some of us, it can be rooted in things that happened to us as children. For example, it took me many years to learn how to get past the sense of abandonment that I felt after my father left when I was just 7 years old, and after which I rarely ever saw him and certainly did not have any real connection with him. And that's something for me that caused a lot of damage in my teenage and adult years when For example, I'd use alcohol to mask my pain for many years, and I had a lot of deep-seated insecurities that caused me to become very controlling, both at work and at home. For a lot of us, much of that stuff comes back to fear and rejection. For most of us humans, we just want to be loved and accepted. And so we can find ourselves dealing with control issues when we're in triggering situations, or even more frequently if we're not fully aware of what we're doing. Or for some people, it might be just that we decide to prioritize our own needs above anyone else's. I think I've made my feelings quite clear in this show before about the damage that can be done to all of us by people with that sort of strong sense of entitlement and self-importance who demand to be in control. But anyway, that's a whole other story. My point is, for a lot of people, it does come back to that core of fear of rejection. So let's talk about control issues for a minute. According to Good Therapy, and I'll include the link in the transcript for that, there are a number of common indicators of control issues, and I'm going to quote directly here. There are myriad ways in which people might attempt to control their environment, themselves, or others. People exert power over others in intimate relationships, workplace settings, families, and other social groups. Examples of exerting control over others include micromanagement, keeping a person from seeing or talking to loved ones or friends, gaslighting, dishonesty, overprotective or helicopter parenting, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, bullying, or taunting. Examples of controlling yourself or your environment include disordered eating, compulsive exercising, self-harm, substance abuse, compulsive arranging, tidying, or cleaning. Someone who struggles with a need for control may experience shame, anxiety, stress, depression, and a host of other mental health concerns. And again, the link for that is in the transcript. So in terms of mental health, being a control freak isn't specifically a personality disorder. However, many disorders are characterized by controlling tendencies, such as borderline personality disorder, narcissism, obsessive-compulsive disorder, paranoid personality disorder, etc. Sometimes a desire for control can manifest when you're in a particularly difficult state. I remember when I was dealing with the height of my own anxiety and depression, my therapist actually pointed out to me that I was doing things where I would be using the squeegee on the glass in the shower to clean straight after a shower, but it was a set number of times, so I was counting those things. And as the therapist pointed out to me, that's a manifestation of feeling out of control and trying to find some control. So there's lots of different ways that it can manifest itself. So let's talk about why is a healthy attitude towards control important for good mental health. Now you'll notice that I used the term healthy attitude, and I did so because feeling like you're in control is a good thing, and it's certainly far better than feeling out of control. But what that involves is being completely clear about what it is possible to control versus what it is not possible to control. Now, I've said this many times in previous episodes. You can control yourself, in other words, your words, your actions, and your feelings, but that's about it. You cannot directly control another person, no matter how hard you might try. And you cannot directly control what happens in the wider world around you. You can only respond to it. You can certainly influence people and events, which is indirect control. In other words, what actually happens is still out of your control, but you can potentially nudge things or people towards a particular path or outcome, but the final result is never in your direct control. Think about your parents, for example. For many of us, they provide us with a set of guidelines and expectations, but the final responsibility for every action that you've ever taken lies with you, and no amount of your parents trying to control what you do or say or don't say would ever have worked. Which is often why most parents of teenagers end up with a strong desire to tear their hair out from frustration. Continuing on from that example, the same is true in reverse. You can try to influence what your parents do or say, but the final choices are always made by them, because they are the only ones who can control their own words, actions, and feelings. Does that make sense? We often have a sense of being out of control for two reasons. Number one, things are happening to us or around us that we're not in full control of. Or number two, we're trying to control something or someone that we have no direct control over. And quite often it's both one and two at the same time. Think about your relationship with the closest people in your life. Your partner, your family, and your closest friends. When things are going well and everyone is in harmony, it's great. But when there's a disconnect or you have issues with one another, it can be torture, especially when you're trying to get them to see your point of view and they just won't budge. These sorts of things can trigger feelings of anger, frustration, fear, stress, hurt, anxiety, loneliness, and even grief. And so if we let issues fester, or if we persist with trying to be in control of something that we cannot ever hope to be in control of, then we end up creating bigger issues around us, and also within ourselves. The challenge is to be clear about what is within our control and manage that effectively, whilst also learning how to accept the things that are outside of our control and let them go. How do you do that? Well, I'm glad you asked. So let's get into the how-to section of today's podcast, how to manage our need for and our attitude towards control. So like most things that I talk about in this podcast, this stuff begins with your mindset. Considering that last month was Mindset Month here on Let's Talk About Mental Health, I'm spending a lot of time talking about mindset again this month. But you know what? It really is such a fundamental part of good mental health. And it's something I cover over and over again because I think we all know that just because we hear these things once or twice, that doesn't necessarily mean that we then turn that into something that we apply to our lives day in, day out. So, first, start by reflecting on your mindset in relation to control. So what is your relationship to the idea of control? Are you a controlling person, or do you allow yourself to be controlled by others? In which case, you may find episode 45, Assertiveness, to be particularly helpful. Ask yourself, do you struggle when it comes to letting go of things outside of your control? Or do you have the ability to focus on what you can control while being pragmatic about the stuff that is outside of your direct control? Look, any journey begins with being clear about where you are today. It's not about judgment. It doesn't matter how you got here, you are where you are. So it's important to be really honest with yourself about where you are today so that you can then have a very clear picture of your current reality and start working out where you want to head towards in the future. So once you're very clear around where you fall on that control spectrum, for want of a better term, next, dig a bit deeper into your mindset around control. So I'm going to read 5 statements out, and I'd like you to consider each of these statements and answer with a yes or a no. And I'll read each one of these out twice before I move on. Okay, here we go. Number 1, answer yes or no to this. I am in direct control of my own words, actions, and feelings. I am in direct control of my own words, actions, and feelings. Number 2, I have direct control over what I do in my life. I have direct control over what I do in my life. Number 3, I accept that I cannot directly control other people. I accept that I cannot directly control other people. Number 4, I accept that I cannot directly control the things that go on in the world. I accept that I cannot directly control the things that go on in the world. And number 5, I am able to influence other people and events, however, the final outcome is still out of my hands. I am able to influence other people and events, however, the final outcome is still out of my hands. So if you answered yes to all 5 of those statements, then you've got a pretty solid handle on this control business. If you answered no to any or all of them, or if you struggled to fully answer yes or no, then you have an opportunity to do some work on how you approach the idea of control. Focus on the specific question or questions that you answered no to, and take some time to understand why you might feel that way. For example, if you answered no to the statement, I accept that I cannot directly control other people, then what led you to answer that way? Deep down, you have to know that it's not possible to control other people, no matter how hard you try, without resorting to emotionally abusive behaviours like dishonesty or manipulating people to question their own sanity, known as gaslighting. And if you don't believe me, just think back to how well previous attempts by other people to control you have worked out. So no judgments here, this is just about being honest with yourself about where you are today. Sometimes we might have these beliefs, but we've never actually stopped to think about why we have those beliefs. So this is a really good opportunity to go back and think about it. It could also be that your ego is refusing to let go of the idea of you being in full control. And if that's the case, okay, again, no judgment, it's just about knowing where you are today. Okay, once you've worked through that part, next, challenge the need for control in all things. This bit will apply for some of you and not others, so I'm not suggesting everyone feels this way, but I know that for myself, I can often want things done a particular way, or I want to feel like I'm in full control of everything, especially if I'm having difficulties with my anxiety. But when you pursue control in all things, you tend to piss people off, which ends up creating more issues. I mentioned earlier that I had a bit of a tendency towards micromanagement sometimes in my previous career, and that was particularly bad for me just before my breakdown in late 2011, because I was trying to create some sense of order in all of the chaos that was going on around me and within me. But as you can probably imagine, that really alienated people, and it just made things worse. My desire for control rarely ever made things better. And so the only thing left to do was reconsider my need for control. There's a middle ground to be found in nearly everything, and sometimes we need to reach a compromise, or accept that things may not look and feel exactly the way we want them to, and that's totally okay. That leads me into my next point, which is related, and it is to remember that relationships are about balance rather than control. So in a healthy relationship, both of you are in control, but at the same time, neither of you are. This applies to all types of healthy relationships, with your partner, with your family, with your friends, and it can even extend to work relationships. A healthy relationship involves give and take. Let me read a quote from Strategic Psychology, which I think explains this point perfectly. You shouldn't feel powerless in your relationship, but you are also not in command. Arguments and disagreements will happen. It is natural. Successful and happy relationships are defined by how you navigate your way through conflict. And the link for that article is in the transcript. So continuing on with the theme of relationships, be they work or personal, the next point is to work on building and maintaining trust. A lot of control issues are more about trust than they are control. As a manager, most people I found myself micromanaging were the ones I didn't trust completely to do the job required, or to do it to the required standard. And so in that sort of case, it's important to dig into that trust bit and focus on building trust, which is proactive, rather than becoming controlling, which is reactive. Things will not change for the better if you don't take time to nurture them and to deal with the root cause of the issues. And trust is something that is built over time, and it's fundamental, and it takes work. And FYI, I'll be covering the subject of trust in more detail next month. So take the time to work on building and maintaining trust. Next, and continuing on with relationships here, be open to different opinions and perspectives. Look, we're all individuals, and we each have our own unique way of looking at the world. And so when we focus too much on why people see things differently to the way we do, we can end up becoming controlling to the point of alienating people. Don't force your perspectives on others, and remember that if it isn't harming anyone, then be kind, and just let other people get on with their lives. And while we're on that subject, what people do in the privacy of their own homes and with their own lives is up to them, not you, so mind your own business. I know that's really blunt, but I feel really strongly about that, and I think a lot of problems in our world could be resolved by just letting people be. As long as you're not harming anyone, I think anyone who listens to this podcast on a regular basis would know by now, my 3 main things in life are do no harm, be kind, and give more than you take. And I think if we all focused on that, what a different world this would be. And on a related note, just remember that nobody is ever going to agree with you 100% of the time. So it's important to be open to different opinions and perspectives, because sometimes you'll come across things that you may never have thought of. And I also hate to break it to you, but you're not always right. So speaking of, my next point is be flexible. Not only will people not agree with you 100% of the time, they also will not do what you want them to do 100% of the time either. This is not my opinion, this is just a fact of life. If you expect the entire world to bow to your needs and wants, then you're in for a series of very rude shocks when you start pissing people off left, right, and centre. You see it when you're out of the shop and someone's kicking up a stink because they have to wait in line for a few minutes, or when you're at a restaurant and someone demands to speak to the manager because the dish that they want isn't available. We cannot have things our way all the time. And so if we want to get along with people, then we need to be flexible and be willing to compromise and let go of a little bit of control every now and then. The next point is to put things into context. And I know this is a bit of a cliche, but I'm going to say it anyway. Ask yourself if whatever it is will really matter in 5 years' time, because most of it just won't. When I think about things from 5 years ago, it's the big events and the people that I care about that I remember, and not the little details of who won what argument or how something was done or what happened at the shop that time. We get so hung up on the little details, and often it can all feel incredibly important and dramatic in the moment. But when the heat of emotion has simmered down, and once time has passed, often we can't even remember what it was that we were so fired up about in the first place. So take the time to put things into perspective in terms of the bigger picture of what really matters. Which leads nicely on to my next point, prioritize. This is where the common sense approach to control bit comes in that I mentioned at the start of the episode. When it comes to wanting to be in control, you need to work out what's more important to you. Is it actually being in control and being right? Or is it continuing with the relationship or whatever the situation is? Let me explain what I mean. I've been with my partner for a very long time, and even though I'd love to always get my way with things, that is a recipe for separation. Instead, I have to ask myself what's more important, getting my own way or maintaining my relationship. And so because my relationship is more important to me, I'm then able to prioritize and focus on compromising, rather than being completely inflexible. That doesn't mean I'm perfect, because I'm certainly not, and I can take a while to get to that place of being prepared to compromise, but fundamentally I know that if I need to, then that's what I need to choose rather than trying to be in control. Everything that we do, say, and feel is a choice, and it's no different when it comes to the desire to be in control. Just remember, you can be in control and be flexible. It's not an either-or proposition. You're not losing if you're flexible. Which leads to my next point, practice self-awareness. Sometimes we do and say things without thinking. And when we do that, we can wind up creating outcomes that are less than ideal, which is a polite way of saying crap. It's important to be yourself and be completely authentic, but you can do that in a way that is thoughtful and also respectful of others. Monitor your words, actions, and feelings. And if you're faced with control issues, then take some time to consider what the appropriate next course of action might be, in terms of doing no harm, being kind, and giving more than you take. If you know that particular people or situations trigger you, do something about it. Either change the nature of the relationship or your involvement with the situation or person. You know, I've worked with people before who have been so negative about the work environment and the job that they do. And look, everyone's different, but I have to admit, there's still a part of me that thinks about those people and thinks, you're in control. Why would you choose to work there? I mean, even when the economy is shit, there's still other career options available. And if something makes you miserable, then you're in control. Don't continue in a situation that makes you miserable. For example, if I feel triggered by another person's actions, then I will address it with them, several times if it continues. And I'll do so in order to influence it if possible. But there is a point at which you stop and think about if there's been no sustained change after a few attempts, then it's up to me to change the situation by either distancing myself or letting go. I used to give people 50,000 chances, but eventually I realized that my peace of mind was just more important than putting up with shit. So distancing myself has become quite an effective means of self-care. Speaking of self-care, my next point is to remember to practice self-care. So there are two parts of this. The first is if you're in the moment of feeling overwhelmed with the need for control or feeling out of control, or even just feeling as though you have no control at all. Just pause and take a few deep breaths and then make some time for self-care. Whether that's a cup of coffee or tea, taking a walk, or whatever healthy option works for you. And then the other part of that is to not just practice self-care when you're faced with challenges. Self-care is important all the time because prevention is better than cure. Now you'll find specific advice for self-care in episode 6 of Let's Talk About Mental Health, so check that out for suggestions on how to practice self-care more regularly. And then my final point is, if you're struggling with control issues or feeling out of control, get support from a counsellor or therapist. Now, I know I say this every episode, but there's a good reason for that, which is that you don't have to just wait until you're actually in the depths of really challenging situations to go and get help from a therapist or counsellor. And you also don't have to deal with this stuff on your own, and nor should you. The advantage of working through things with a trained professional is that they can provide you with a much more objective viewpoint. And they can also help you to see things that you might not have thought of, while also helping you to find solutions that work for you. It can take time to find someone that you feel comfortable talking with, and once you do, then it will also take more time to work through things. It doesn't just happen in 1 or 2 sessions. But you'll find that professional support helps you to look at things from different angles and to identify new ways of addressing challenges, as well as building on your strengths. All of which then helps you to be more comfortable with accepting what is within your control and letting go of things that are outside of your control. Because when it comes to control and mental health, what it all boils down to is this. All that you have direct control over is yourself, your words, your actions, and your feelings. You can choose the words that come out of your mouth, you can choose what you do, and you can choose what you feel. But for everything else, you can only hope to influence it if you're lucky. And for most things, it's out of your control. If you try to control things or people that are out of your control, then you cause yourself pain and suffering, not to mention what you're inflicting on other people. And life is too valuable to spend it feeling shitty. Your words, your actions, and your feelings are the most valuable things in your life because it is through them that you can shape your own destiny. And since that's the stuff that is within your control, why waste your time on the other stuff when you've already got everything that you need to create the world that you want? Once you learn how to harness your words, actions, and feelings while letting go of the stuff that you cannot control, you begin to take real control of your life and shape it into anything you want it to be, because your life is yours to control, so make it one that you can feel proud of. Each week I like to finish up by sharing a quote about the week's topic, and I encourage you to take a few moments to really reflect on it and consider what it means to you. This week's quote is by Wayne Dyer, and it is, "You cannot always control what goes on outside, but you can always control what goes on inside." Let me repeat that. You cannot always control what goes on outside, but you can always control what goes on inside. Alright, that's nearly it for this week. Next week I'll be talking about balance. Continuing October's theme of foundations of good mental health here on Let's Talk About Mental Health, next week I'll be exploring how the idea of balance fits in with well-being, since I talk about it quite a lot. I'll be talking about what balance is and what it isn't, why it matters for good mental health, and how to incorporate more balance into your life for better mental health and well-being. I hope you'll join me for that episode, which will be released on Monday morning in Australia, New Zealand, and the rest of the Asia-Pacific region, Sunday evening in the UK, Ireland, Europe, and the Middle East, and Sunday afternoon in the US, Canada, and the rest of the Americas. You can find past episodes and additional content at the website, which is letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. And you can also find Let's Talk About Mental Health on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest at LTA Mental Health, as well as on YouTube. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform and tell someone you know about the show, because word of mouth really helps new people to discover the program. Thank you very much for joining me today. Look after yourself and make a conscious effort to share positivity and kindness out into the world, because you get back what you put out. Take care and talk to you next time.